Welcome to Flight Club, a podcast where we want to dive into specific aspects of flight levels, share experiences, and introduce you to the flight levels experts on a more personal level.
Welcome to Flight Club. My name is Klaus Leopold, and my guest today is Mike Freislich. Hi, Mike.
Hi, Klaus. Good to see you.
Cool. Good to see you. Well, we want to talk about Conway's law and flight levels today. That's like the big headline of what we want to do here. But before we dive into the topic, Mike, can you please tell us a little bit about yourself? I mean, what do you do professionally and how did you get into this field?
Sure. I guess I help organizations succeed in their quest to deliver excellent services and products to their customers. I do this obviously with flight levels and many other techniques that I've picked up around a 20-year journey of helping, mostly harmlessly helping. And my brief, how did I get into this? I taught myself coding at 9 years old, out of an old handheld book with a ring-bound manual. I got into writing electronic music as a band member at 17. And then I went into the real world of work, tech support, system administration, network operations, became a paid developer, and then got into an interesting role. Actually, it was a made-up role by our organization. They had many software projects on the go at any given time, and they made up this role called the Project Operations Manager. Have you ever heard of such a thing?
That sounds great.
And this role was all about holding the business people and the technical people at an arm's length relationship. And the more I tried to do this, the more I realized how much these people actually needed to speak more with one another. So that really started the journey. And in between, I became a Scrum Master, I think like many people, back in 2005. And then learned various methods like less, Kanban, safe, and ultimately flight levels, which of course I blame you for. So,
damn it! So, you started coding, and now you are more like talking to people, kind of. Yeah. So there was a transition going on, but you caught my attention. You started with 9 years. Yeah. What computer was it?
It was a BBC microcomputer with 32 kilobytes of RAM.
Yes.
So I was coding in assembly at the time.
Nice. Because I started on a Commodore 64,
Right.
64 not megabyte, kilobyte of memory. Yeah. And I was also coding assembler. So from assembler to talking to people is actually a little bit a distance. Yeah.
A little, yes.
A little. Okay, cool. So, you are also a flight levels guide in flight levels or with Flight Levels Academy. So, how did you actually get into flight levels?
Well, there was this guy called Klaus Leopold, and he taught me Kanban. And when he did so, he introduced some concepts around flight levels. And this really sang to me because a lot of what I had worked on before, especially with teams, I noticed there were things going on before the teams started their work regarding the work that they were about to start doing. And there were things going on after the teams had finished their work. And I felt that this needed something better than just working with teams to deal with, and expose that whole process. And beyond that, the the dynamics between the people working on the company's direction and the people on the ground there's this big gap. And yeah, I think the more I looked at flight levels, the more I discovered here's something that actually speaks to this and provides some avenues. I don't want to say answers because, but provides some paths to dealing with this stuff quite directly. So this is what led me there.
That's good. So, and this was already quite some time ago. So I don't know for sure when I was. So you're in South Africa,
Yes.
and I visited South Africa, I guess, the first time 2012, and maybe it was 13 or something like this. That where we met, right? So it's already quite a long time.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, it's been a while.
Yeah.
I guess, and I mean, since then I've been applying a lot of the concepts, sometimes very directly, and sometimes not even talking about flight levels, but applying the concepts at the various customers and clients that I work with.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the beauty of the approach, because it's somehow method agnostic. So you're kind of doing great things, but you don't have to call it out like, cool. And today we want to talk a little bit about Conway's law and how this goes together with flight levels, or how they are related or not, or Conway's law. What is Conway's law? Can you explain it quickly?
I will try. Look, I mean, and it's an old thing, right? Like most wisdom, there's not a lot that's new. I mean, so Conway's law was a programmer actually called Melvin Conway, and he introduced this concept back in 1967. And I wasn't even born yet. And essentially what he was saying, or his quote is, organizations that design systems are constrained to produce designs that are copies of the communication structures in the organization. Now that's kind of a mouthful, but essentially what it's saying is it speaks to how the communication pathways and the transfer of information and the structure of the organization impact decision-making and solutioning. So in other words, if I never get to speak to those people over there, it's going to constrain how I solution things. And so there's this direct correlation between the quality and fitness for purpose of the solutions we build for our markets and the structure and communication structures in an organization.
So Conway's law is talking about the communication structure and not the organizational structure, right? Because that's something what I hear quite often. We just need to change the org chart, because then we we solve Conway's law. No, not solve Conway's law, but if we just change the org chart, then everything is fine. But he's not talking about the organizational structure. He's talking about the communicational structure, and I think that's two different things. But what is your view on this?
Yes, so my view is they are very definitely two different things. They impact one another, of course, but they are different. So, there are many instances, and I'm sure the viewers can relate. There are many instances that I've seen where there is this structure of how we're supposed to do things, and yet people need to bypass that structure in order to get things done. And that doing things outside of the structure to get things done is actually the real communication pathway. So yes, for sure the org structure plays a part, but I find usually org structures are built around how do we manage the people, maybe more than how do we effectively deliver on our strategy. So, yeah.
It's two different things, yeah. And maybe just like, do you have an example? So what does this mean? So if we build systems based on our communication structure and our communication structure sucks, so how what does this mean for a system? So how is it built?
Well, I kind of think of the analogy, if I'm building cars and there's maybe even a bunch of companies, because it's so hardened, there's a group of companies that are building a car. And one of the companies specializes in building steering wheels. Another, specializes in the engine, and another specializes in the seats and so on. Then those are the components of what we call a car. And the overall design of a car isn't going to fundamentally change to be better, not within that organization or group of organizations anyway. We'll always have a steering wheel, but maybe a joystick is better, or maybe, I don't know, dare I say, like a Neuralink or something like that for driving a car is a better option. But that will never come about in that company because of the constraints on the structure and how people are solutioning. They're solutioning in compartments rather than getting together regularly to solve how should we make sure we can steer the car. And the other side effects are things like, specifically I've noted a lot in software product development, there can be a lot of duplication of the same things happening in different areas of the organization because we don't have access to each other or each other's work. So we have to redo it, and we end up with multiple versions of the same thing. So yeah, these are just, I guess, some of the side effects of constrained communication structures that aren't focused on delivery or on the architecture of products and so on.
So not so great side effects. Yeah. So a communication structure we were talking about, right? And not the org structure. So are there ways how we can change our communication structure without changing the org structure? Because this would be like for me, changing the org structure is quite expensive, right? I mean, we need to do a reorganization, shuffle people around, and yeah, this is always like it's a huge energy you need to invest in terms of change. So just like to make sure that the right people talk about the right stuff at the right time, right? So in the end, I'm not sure if you would find the perfect org chart so that all the communications are just like great. So what other solutions are there?
Yeah, I guess the perfect org chart would be one that was changing constantly, and
yes,
that wouldn't be so perfect, right?
No.
So yes, of course, there are ways, and it really boils down to what is the design goal. If the design goal is to create value flow through the organization, that's a different design goal to how are we managing the people in the organization, and how are we setting up all of our management meetings to check on status and these kinds of things. So I prefer the former, which is how do we organize for easy flow of value through our organizations. And what got me thinking was re-examining Conway's law and then thinking about the flight level systems architecture and actually what we are doing there. So a big part of it in the systems architecture, we talk about flight routes. And this is from the perspective of the value that is desired for the market, typically for the market. And if you imagine I'm the piece of value, where do I start in the organization? Where am I moving through in order to get out the door and ultimately to the customer? So it's the route that the value takes from, if you like, idea to impact. And so really what we're doing is we're ignoring, initially we're ignoring the org chart, and we're saying, what are some of the key places where people need to coordinate their efforts and their thinking around ideas? So, I mean, some of these things are good examples, or typical examples are things like products, things like services, things like shared platforms that are used by the products and services, and perhaps some enabling functions that are common to everyone, like procurement maybe, or legal, or something like this. So we identify all of these elements, and then we look at how they are interconnected and spot even further coordination points. And we map all of this out into a topology so that we can then look at what are the flight routes between this kind of value-centered approach, value generation-centered approach to design. And the beauty of that is is that we can identify, as things are crossing boundaries in the decision-making boundaries in the organization, there are usually exchanges needed or interactions needed between different groups of people in order to carry the context of why that value, what it's for, and so on, and what is it, through to different groups of people. So the being able to identify those interactions, those flight routes, and the groups of people involved is a very powerful tool. And all of that can happen despite the org structure. So there's a lot of value in that way of looking at an organization and how it ticks.
Yeah. So it's kind of a different, I don't know, representation form. I mean, an org chart is a representation of our organization, like how units, departments, and whatever reporting lines, that's what we see. But we never see value flow or something like this on an org chart. And we also have things like, I don't know, process description, which comes closer to delivering value, but process descriptions are often very, I don't know, administrative, bureaucratic, and it's not the same thing. So I think, like what you just said, is that we can offer a different form of representation that's currently somehow missing, and that's somehow how I view this contribution of flight levels, that we add a representation form that we can express something that we cannot express these ways today. Yeah,
and it's not just a representation; it's a focused representation, because it's focused on how things actually need to happen or are happening, rather than how how we pass things from meeting to meeting between hierarchical layer and so on within an organization. We're less interested in that and more interested in redefining that ultimately, so that it matches what needs to get done. And in that way, it's kind of very focused. Yeah.
And you mentioned another term, so it was somewhere in between. So we were talking about the flight routes, and then you dropped the term topology. I think you were talking about the work systems topology, right?
Correct.
Which is also a part in a very important part actually when it comes to flight levels. So can you talk a little bit about work systems topologies and how this somehow influences our how we think about companies?
Sure. So first off, topology, big word.
Yes.
Right?
It is.
It's a polysyllabic word. So yeah, topology really is a logical layout that shows various nodes and specifically how they are interconnected. So if you consider we have multiple products and services in our organization, and we have strategy for each of the products, and we have org strategy, which is global to everyone, we're able to lay these things out and show how they actually connect with one another. And not just how they connect, but also when we overlay teams on top of this, we can start seeing who needs to connect around what topics in the organization. The other focus of it is which flight level is each node on.
Yeah.
And the flight I mentioned earlier, there's boundaries around different types of decision making in an organization, and that for me is how I classify what a flight level is. So there's a level of decision making which is operational, where we're doing stuff and it's very focused on the detail. There's a level of decision making which is really around coordinating the efforts of multiple people, groups of people, teams around a common purpose, like progressing a product, for example. And there's a level of decision making around conceiving of, defining, and tracking the progress on strategy. So each of these is a flight level, and that's an overlay on the topology, which is made clear through its simple diagram that we can see how all these elements are interacting.
Yeah.
And we're very interested in that diagram of the links between different elements, because those are the places often where cracks exist in the communication structures in the organization.
Yeah.
And we try and create as much visibility of that as possible and design things to fill those gaps.
Yeah. So I think that's one of the missing representation forms in organizations, like in addition to the org chart. We need the org chart, but the org chart and the work systems topology are two different things. So of course you see teams on the org chart and you see teams on the work systems topology, but that's pretty much it. So if we go to flight level 2, for instance, you just said a nice word. So it's about we coordinate around our value generation, kind of, right? So we don't see this on the org chart. So this is a missing element in the org chart, what we bring in the work systems topology. And identifying the flight level 2 systems is actually not always that easy, right? So because
Correct.
it gets to the point where one team might work with different or contribute to different flight level 2 systems, right? So it's really, it's a tricky thing. Do you have some tips how to identify flight level 2 systems?
I do, and I also want to just use a real case I worked with, which just goes to show how tricky this can be, right? So not a massive organization, but certainly not a small organization. So they had around 15 software development teams and a number of network operations teams, business teams, different business units, and so on. And if we just looked at the 15 software development teams, within what I suppose they would call the product organization, where they're building product and so on. I asked the leadership and the teams to list all the products in the organization, and then to list all the teams, and then to draw links between which teams worked on which products and which teams had dependencies on which other teams. And one of the so we did this in groups, and one of the diagrams actually had Spider-Man on it because it looked like a spider web,
monster,
right? A spaghetti monster. And the funny thing is, in designing that team structure, their primary principle was, we're designing to reduce dependencies. The result was a lot of dependencies. So even with best efforts, with clever people, with the right idea and focus, it failed to produce the result they wanted. What we did with that, for example, was we simplified the product set. So they had a lot of products. We simplified the product set. We abstracted it into portfolios of products. In fact, what they had were 4 product managers, each which had a portfolio of products. So we started by looking at that and said, okay, well, perhaps there's 4 product areas. And each of those product areas needs coordination between the various teams. And as it turned out, when looking at it that way, it created, within each product area, there were primary teams that were focused generally on and only on that product area. And it started making the picture look a lot less frantic. So finding ways to broaden what is product rather than have every little product be a thing on its own was a really useful thing, like descaling. But we focused on product. We focused on service. So things like support, customer support is a service more than it is a product, I suppose.
Product.
We focused on tools and platforms which are used internally by the products, using their output for within their product. And there are other things, I suppose, as well, like maybe there's a new big legislation that comes in, and it's going to affect a whole lot of stuff across various departments, legal and sales and our webpage and a whole bunch of other things, which now includes people from all over the organization. And I might see that as a kind of a pop-up system where we need to coordinate efforts for a particular period of time, but not indefinitely. So that might be another coordination system or flight level 2 system.
Cool. This was packed with so much great information. Thanks for this, Mike. So, and I think there was one particular part I want to shed a light on, or shine the light on. I don't know. What you said is you were drawing like this work systems topology, designing the work systems topology based on how this organization actually worked, right? So first there was this spaghetti monster, and then you tried to come up with a structure. And I think that's an important point. So it's not, I have seen company X is doing it like this, so we are doing it like that now. These are our product teams or whatsoever, right? So, and I think that's the core of flight levels. Flight levels doesn't tell you have to do it like this, because otherwise flight levels police will put you into jail, because this is how it works for each and every organization on this planet. You figure it out. And as you said, you're doing like simulations kind of. So you're like, okay, if we structure it like this, let's take a look at our spaghetti monster. What would this mean? Like, can we reduce some lines where a line represents a dependency, or is it actually getting worse? So you have something like an organizational development, organizational design simulator when you're doing it. And the thing is, and that's why I like what you said before. The best org chart is an org chart that's changing all the time. Although that's not what we want, right? But we want
No.
the work systems topology to change and to emerge, because things change on the market. We have different products. We have a different, I don't know, strategy where we like focus on different topics, and this changes the way how we deliver value to the market, and we need to react on it. And a reaction like, let's change the org chart again, the 8,000 times in our company history, is so expensive. And I don't know why not each and every company is just like working with work systems topologies, because that's so cheap. It's paper, right? And then you just organize how people communicate. So
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it speaks to resilience, right? Being able to stay in an ever-changing market and environment, being able to not take a major knock because of a pandemic or, these kinds of things. So you certainly don't want to have to restructure your organization every single time there's a change in the market. Or every time you spin up a new project, suddenly we change our organization. This would be madness. So yes, rather tweaking communication pathways and making those super explicit, and not just doing it. I like the paper analogy, but it's not just me sitting on my own, drawing on a piece of paper. It's bringing together the people who it involves, and we build this together. As far as change management goes, it means we've got collective understanding already of what we're designing. So yeah, there's just a whole lot to the approach that, to me, just makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And I always like to say Flight Levels is really lightweight and cost effective. And that's one part what I mean with it.
Law, so if what Conway's law is saying is the communication structures in the organization are directly impacting the architecture of products that are going, and the design of products that are going out into the market, then the converse probably is true as well. So in other words, if we think about Conway's law in reverse, it suggests that perhaps what we should be doing is architecting the communication structure in our organization as we find a new need for delivery or for the market. So we should be adapting that in order to build the right stuff. If we constantly have only the same communication structures in our organization and something new comes in, then we're squashing it into a system that wasn't designed to cater for it. And in this way, we've got to be easy and quick to evolve, and that's what it really helps with.
And especially today, because we really see that the world is spinning quite fast these days. I mean, let's talk about AI. What's going on here, right? So, and if your only reaction is let's change the org chart again and let's come up with some AI department, well, good luck with this. But that's exactly what I mean when I talk about Flight Levels is cost effective and lightweight, because these changes are so lightweight because it's not the structural change. It's a change of communication. I mean, it's still a change, and in terms of money, especially in these days where the economical situation in many countries is not the best, that's so cost effective. So I think that's the way to go. Nice. So, Mr. Freislich, how can we end this? Is there
just do it?
Is there a summary what we can, or what you can give to our listeners? So how is flight levels and Conway's law somehow connected or not? And what can we what can we do with it?
Yeah, so I think probably my biggest takeaway is be very clear when thinking about anything to do with meetings, groups of people, problem solving together, and essentially how we go about repeatedly delivering value to our clients. Be very careful in the design of that to focus on the communication, focus on the value generation, and not worry too much about the org chart. So yes, find ways to design using things like work system topologies to clarify your thinking, and then tweak things in small increments rather than just throwing a whole bunch of change out at the organization all the time. Is probably my main takeaway. Yeah.
That sounds like a perfect ending story or ending word. Thank you so much, Mike, for your time. So if any one of you is interested in the topic Mike was just talking about, Flight Levels offers a workshop, which is called Flight Level Systems Architecture, and Mike offers dates for this workshop. So we will link to his profile and to the next workshop dates for Flight Level Systems Architecture in the show notes. If you are interested in lightweight and cost-effective communication structures, that's the place to go. All right, cool. That's it for today. Thanks, Mike, for joining me here, and see you soon. Goodbye.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Flight Levels podcast. Subscribe now to be updated for the next episode. Did this podcast remind you of anybody? Share the link with that person that you think should also join the Flight Club. And join our free community to have access to a lot of free content, as well as direct contact with all the coaches and members. Visit our web to create your account and more information. Go to flightlevels.io.